More provincial leaders are calling on the federal government to pause the carbon tax increase set to kick in next month. In a letter to the Prime Minister, Liberal Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey writes this: I respectfully request that you consider pausing the implementation of the April 1st carbon tax increase at least until inflation stabilizes, interest rates lower, and related economic pressure on the cost of living sufficiently cool.
It's a significant inflationary pressure point. And with respect to the motives and the incentive behind the carbon tax, we just don't think it's the right instrument at this time.
Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston wrote his own letter to the Prime Minister saying your carbon tax is not the way to accomplish the goals of reducing emissions and increasing renewable energy, and it is not in the best interest of Nova Scotians. Now, those letters follow a similar plea from PEI's Premier Dennis King on Friday. So will Ottawa listen? The power panel is with me. Kate Harrison, Françoise Boivin, Amanda Alvaro, and Emily Nicolas. So Emily, I mean, Francois Legault is not asking for them to pause the carbon tax. He's cap and trade. And that's pretty much it. There seems to be quite the national consensus at the subnational level that this policy needs to change and needs to go. What do you think happens on April 1, and how does this government respond?
First of all, this is a really interesting one to follow from Quebec. For once, we're not in the center of a national crisis.
You're not the troublemaker this time, right?
No, it's everybody. But that being said, I'm curious to hear what the others have to say, but I will start by answering this. When, carbon tax has always been somewhat of an issue, especially on the Conservative side, and there's a lot of Conservative premiers across the country. However, we got into the situation we are in now because the Liberals played nice on one exception and decided to do something coming from the pressures, especially in the Maritimes around home gas heating, and so that was something that created the political climate that we're in now. And just so from a political perspective, thinking that playing nice again and being okay, you want to pause, let's pause, and that premiers are going to be yes, thank you, this is what we wanted. We're going to vote for you and wish you a good re-election campaign. That is not the way politics work. And so the Liberals showed witness. The premiers are and Pierre Poilievre are at Justin Trudeau's throat for that. If he does it again, that's just going to show weakness of leadership. Until there is no more tax, people will continue pushing. And so every premier that's writing, we like the tax, maybe you can pause the tax, maybe you can pause it for a little bit. If I was in Justin Trudeau's office, I would not believe a word of that.
Yeah, and just to point, it was home heating oil primarily in Atlantic Canada, not home heating gas.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
We all took your point though. So Amanda, what is the path forward here, right? Like Andrew Furey is the only other Liberal in the club, and he's saying no, don't go ahead with this. Scott Moe is just flat out not collecting it and remitting it and walking consequence-free, as it seems right now, as the federal government is waiting to respond. For something that is such a signature policy, I don't know how firm and strong they are on this right now, because it doesn't look like they are.
Well, let me tell you, David, if I knew the path forward, it would be like the magic wand on this one. I think that, the Liberal government, if there was one issue that they could rewind and sort of at least, reframe the communication on, it has to be this one. And it's really so unfortunate, right? Like in April, families will receive rebates, and at the same time, they're talking about really pausing on the increases. And this whole notion, the idea of the rebate has never penetrated. It's not part of the conversation from coast to coast. And that is such a huge challenge for the Liberals. They attempted a rebrand a month ago to start calling it a rebate. I think it was called an incentive program before. But in both cases, it's so hard for people to understand. They're feeling it in their pocketbooks, and it's really easy for the Conservatives to make a really meaningful argument on this one. I think it's a really simple argument to make, and the provinces have all seen how effective that argument can be, and they've taken it up in their home provinces. And the federal government has been on their back foot on this since day one.
Well, can I just interrupt because I want to ask one quick question? Like the rebate is one thing, right? And you can whether people feel it and whether it's branding or not, but the effectiveness of the policy is increasingly becoming a question, right? Like the clean steel stuff they've done with Algoma, you can say this investment takes this amount of emissions out of the atmosphere on an annual permanent basis. The same with electrification of cars and switching off, different fuel sources. Have they made the case that this is even effective? Because I don't know how to find a catalog of what the consumer price does in terms of reducing emissions. You know what I mean?
No, I don't think that they have made the case. They made a jurisdictional case looking at other jurisdictions when they were first putting this policy in the window. But I think that they've been so busy having to deal with the affordability side of this policy that they haven't even been able to make really the climate change argument on this policy. And that's what happens when you get into a bit of like, it's like a snowball effect of communication when you're always trying to like pull back on the thing that's not resonating. This has been a challenge from day one. So, where to go from here? I think that this is a time, I'll say one last thing. I agree with Emily. I think that if the government looks like they're really attempting carve-outs in different provinces or really acquiescing to premiers that are calling for some of these carve-outs, I think they find themselves in an even more difficult position. Right. So the only place for them to be right now is continue to make the argument and try to make it as simply and effectively as possible.
Yeah, and if they do it again, Stephen Guilbeault would probably walk, right? Because he more or less said, this is the only one carve-out on my watch. And we've got that carve out and no more. But, Pierre Poilievre is traveling the country. He's headed to Atlantic Canada, where the prodigious letter writers are all based right now, to do an axe the tax, spike the hike sort of tour. Can the government even do anything on this without looking like it is weak leadership and alienating what progressives are still there for them right now?
Yeah, well, the premiers are a very effective correspondence unit for the Conservative Party right now, so that's off to them. The short answer is no. I think that the government has put themselves in an impossible position because of what they did in October with that carve out for home heating oil primarily in Atlantic Canada. Because what they did was effectively say, we have the ability to be compromised on this marquee position that we've taken. So they keep it as is. They continue to face heat from premiers. People say, you're out of touch with our affordability needs. They opt to take it away. They've then compromised their base of support. That's more of this Liberal NDP voter coalition that believes that this is the only government that can do something on the environment. It's actually the only issue that the Liberals continue to pull ahead on when compared to their Conservative and NDP counterparts. So if I were them, despite the politics being what they are, I'd probably hold the line, because at this point it's more important to seem that you are convinced that this is the right policy rather than admit it's been both a policy and a communications failure.
Françoise, is that a tenable position? Because even in the Alberta NDP leadership race right now, you've got candidates saying, consumer carbon tax, maybe it's time to reconsider that and focus just on an industrial-based solution.
Well, like my colleague said, the problem was the Liberals backing up from their own policy, because carbon tax was a win-all, and it had a good value. Now, seeing that you make an exception at some point, how good the exception is. It just gives your opponents, and they're numerous in this country. I mean, Alberta, Saskatchewan's been fighting this tooth and nail for years. So to see the way they handle this file, I don't know. Like we said at the time when they did it, I don't know who's advising them, how they're advising, communicating something like that. Because today I was answering some questions from somebody who said, I don't get it. You say the carbon tax is good. You send back the money. There's 10% left that goes in certain programs. Are you sure they go there? And what do they do? And so on and so forth. And who gets the money? So again, it's back to the way they communicate their things. I think maybe they realize that it's not as good as they thought it would be. Maybe there are other ways to do it. But at this point in time, I agree with the colleagues. it would look so bad politically if they would fold and say we are not going ahead. Maybe they can do something a bit like the beer, a bit less hike than it was supposed to be, and let it roll. But there's no way that they look like winners one way or the other if they do as such.
Emily, I just wonder, like, to flip it around to the people saying pause it. I know there's an affordability challenge in the country right now and a cost of living political crisis and economic crisis, though inflation is steadying and we'll probably get some interest rate reductions this year. But for those who say paying a carbon price is too hard and too expensive, is getting to a net zero economy supposed to be cheap and easy? Because I don't see a path where it's both of those things, right? It's going to have to require some sacrifice and some cost if this is a path this country is going to choose.
When we were discussing a couple of months ago, the carve-out, winter was coming, people were worried about the price of heating, especially in rural Canada. We could have, and at some point I did have, my wonkish brain on and be, this is reasonable because this and this and that. But to even have that wonky conversation, you need to be amongst people who see the value of working towards eliminating climate change.
Right.
And are trying to look at the best tools to get there. And so then we can have a discussion on the instruments to use the vocabulary that was just used by one of the premiers. The conversation of instruments can only be had with people who have the same goals. And when you listen to certain premiers and certain political elements in Canada, there are people who strongly believe that first of all, that climate change doesn't exist, or that even if they do say it exists, it should not affect what kind of industry we're having in Canada. Those industries should be operating with at least environmental regulations as possible. And it should not change our way of life because our way of life is sacred. And how dare the government change our way of life? And so when that is a political force in Canada, you have that, it makes it very, very, very hard to have conversations about the instruments that does not derail by that part of the Canadian conversation.
Yes, at times it's like a priest and an atheist arguing about God. You can assign those roles whichever way you want with that debate. But Amanda, in the winter, opponents of these increases complain about home heating, and in the summer, as we're seeing in these letters, it's about the price of gas. Yeah. Right? So there's a seasonal club to hit this policy with wherever you turn.
Yeah, and I think also, like to Emily's point, at a time when Canadians chose this policy, we were in a very different economic climate as well. So where the environment or where climate change falls on your list of priorities, maybe at one point when economically you're feeling better about things, about your own pocketbooks, about, affordability. And it could take a very different position, and frankly has, when you look at polling and where some of these policies and priorities land for people in this climate. So the government, unfortunately, though, it's still one of their signature policies. It's one of the reasons why they were initially elected. And so to pull back on it, very challenging, yet at the same time, having to recognize that Canadians are in a very different position today than they were when they first chose this government. Not to say that climate isn't important to them, not to say that the environment isn't important to them, but that they might not want to put their money on it right now. Yeah. They may put their vote on it, but it's not one that they're, willing to write a check on. So the government may have to adjust its position in order to deal with the reality or the circumstance of the situation that Canadians find themselves in.
So, Kate, do you think consumer carbon pricing can survive the next election? It's either going to be a very wounded re-elected Liberal government or a surgent Conservative government, barring some dramatic change to the New Democrats or the Bloc going national. Sure. Do you think it can survive? Prime Minister Blanchette, I mean, who knows, right?
You just made him very happy.
He could make an alliance with Alberta.
The short answer, I don't think so. I think that the Conservatives and Conservative premiers have actually really disrupted the national discourse on this issue. It was not in the too recent past that carbon tax, a consumer price on carbon was actually accepted.
The Conservatives ran on it last time, and under Harper.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is a marked change from what we have now. And I think, to Amanda's point, the fiscal reality is different. People's affordability reality is different. But now the Liberals don't seem in touch with kind of they're not meeting those environmental commitments. They're not meeting the affordability commitments. So I think it is almost impossible to not have the next election, at least in part, be a referendum on the carbon tax. And to the Conservatives' benefit, they have been very, very clear in terms of what they would do about that. And in an environment where contrast wins, the Conservatives have been very deliberate about the contrast they've drawn on this issue, perhaps more than any other issue so far.
Right. And Francois, as we know, if Blanchet will somehow become Prime Minister, it would be cap and trade nationally anyway. It wouldn't even be consumer carbon pricing, right? That would be the path forward.
Exactly. Anyway, you're always a loser when your key policy has the word tax in it. Yeah. So, I mean, Mr. Poilievre can go around and talk about axe the tax. Depending on where you are, people will say, he's right, I hate the carbon tax. Another place is going to be, I hate the beer tax in Quebec. I hate all the taxes. It's so, it's such an easy rally to have. So it's going to be fun to see how the Liberals can turn this thing around if they can. Otherwise, they will prove Mr. Ford right when he talk about annihilation. Boy, I have a hard time with that word.
All right, we got to go. But, Amanda, to your point, even the Supreme Court has said it is not a tax. It is a regulatory charge. But again, that's the comms challenges and the shorthand that everybody uses on this. Gang, that was fun. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Power Panel, Emily Nicolas, Amanda Alvaro, Françoise Bovin, and Kate Harrison.